There's one area that a lot of people have a difficult time understanding, and that is demand forecasting for their inventory on Amazon. So there are typically two different categories that people are going to fall into: current sellers and new sellers. So if you are a current seller, you can fall any range of having product already there to having sold it for years and years. The longer you have sold a product, the more data that you have to be able to understand demand forecasting for, what you should be looking at. If you are, let's say, having sold for the last 2 years, you can look at your 12-month summary behind you and then add on whatever you are up year over year on to understand how much inventory you should be sending in. However, if you are a new seller, that problem gets a little bit more difficult because you have no data to go off of, or at least you don't think you have data to go off of. So we're going to dive into the two different scenarios here: how to demand forecast properly, where to look at for demand forecasting on Amazon, and look at each and every single one of them. So first and foremost, let's take a look over for someone who's a current seller. So if you are a current seller, you have product that's being sold for, a while now at the very least, you can come over here to inventory, then you can go over to your inventory dashboard for FBA. Once you go over to your inventory dashboard, we're going to come down here to restock inventory. So this restock inventory is going to give us a good idea of all of our products. We'll just do it by sales summary right now for the last 30 days. And this is going to tell us a lot of information. One, if we actually need to be sending in any inventory, what our recommended ship date is going to be for that inventory. So all of this comes off the idea of Amazon wanting to have roughly 30 to 60 days minimum of inventory in at any given time. So Amazon has that calculation probability. You're able to kind of see and predict when are you going to have to send in inventory. So Amazon, as you can see, says recommended ship date for this product right here is the 7th of this month. Why are they saying that? Well, it's because currently we only have around a 53-day supply. We will probably run down to 45 days here shortly within the next couple of days. Amazon wants to keep us above that number. So they will consider anything that is 45 days to be, outside of what we should have as far as inventory goes. And what they recommend is the minimum inventory level to not incur low inventory fees. So you always want to take into consideration what Amazon is going to consider to be low inventory, because some people may say, oh, I don't want to keep more than, let's say, 30-day supply on hand, but you would be constantly getting hit with low inventory fees from Amazon. So secondarily to this, they have this cool little tool for forecasting. So you can look at this and you can see your unit demand forecast. So what this gives you is essentially a historical date range of a certain time frame and a forecast for the future. So if we take this historical date range, let's just do the last half year, and then we will do it forward for the next half year. So as you can see, we have a somewhat just graph here showing exactly what we can imagine for our actual demand forecasting. So this little dotted line here is Amazon's optimistic idea, and it's usually right or under this within 90% of the time for what they think we are going to need over the next couple of weeks here. Secondarily to that, they have what we did last year on this unit at that same time. So a few things that play into this is how much are we going to outdo last year's sales. So again, if you are up, let's say, 20% over last year as far as sales and units sold goes, then you can accurately predict that you're likely going to need about 20% more than you did last year. Now, if you're somewhat in the same baseline, if you're still seeing some issues and whatnot with your inventory control, then there's potential where you're not going to actually need any more than that. However, this tool is going to be really useful for us for understanding, okay, if we have a 3-month manufacturing cycle, which many people do. So if you have a 3-month manufacturing cycle and it takes 3 months to make 1,000 units, and you are typically going to sell through around 1,000 units within 90 days, as you can see, for instance, this one, we have about 1,900 units, and our total day supply is 93, meaning that within the next probably 3-4 weeks here, we are going to need to start looking at having this replenished. So we just sent in a replenishment, as you can see here. This day's supply will show us everything we have. So it's total inventory supply, which is available inbound and reserved. We can see our inbound of 360, which is about a 1 month or about a half month supply. And then we can also see our reserved. What is the reserve for? FC processing, transfer. So it's transferring between fulfillment centers. So when you are looking to typically send inventory to Amazon, again, I'm going to recommend you try and keep somewhere in the ballpark of 60 to 90 days of inventory at Amazon at any given time. This covers you for a few different areas. One, it covers you for the idea of not having any low inventory fees. That's going to be extremely important because we don't want to be overcharged by Amazon for anything. Secondarily to that as well, it also covers you in the event of growth. So if you are in a growth mentality when it comes to your product right now, let's say you're trying to grow 10%, 15, 20%, it is good to understand that you should have roughly 60 and 90 days. Now, there are a few different areas where there are some outliers that you have to keep in mind, such as, do you have a product that's seasonal? Most people do. So let's say your product is either winter seasonal or summer seasonal. So if your product is a summer seasonal item, you should be looking at the idea of having it restocked before you get into the summer, and then have a separate inventory forecasting measurement for the winter months. So typically, if you're going to, let's say, have a 50 to 60% decrease of overall sales velocity during the winter, you want to prepare for that. You want to make sure you're not sending in the winter months, that 50+% of actual inventory that you would normally not need during that time. Seasonality is one of the biggest factors to take into consideration and usually requires you to have multiple different forecasts throughout the year. So you can't just do a 12-month forecast, assume that that's going to be everything, and go from there. It's usually best to have roughly a 3 to 6 month forecast ahead of time of what you are going to do, such as the fact of looking at our forecast. We can accurately assume that in the next 6 months, we're going to have around, let's say, an increase of 100 units. So we'll want to keep that in mind for when we are pushing forward for the restocks. Along that same measure as well is the idea of the product sales growth. So are you looking at having extra advertising expenditure? So if you are looking at advertising and sales growth, you want to make sure that you're going to align with that. You don't want to be caught up with all of this inventory, just 6 months plus of inventory, because that ties up funds that could be going towards something like advertising. Now, let's say all of this does not matter because you do not have a product on Amazon yet. You are looking at selling a product. Well, there's an easy way to predict what you should be sending in for that as well. If we head on over to Amazon and we just search up, let's do cooking boards. If we're looking at cooking boards, you can see we have a million different choices here. Probably not the best place to get into, but we can easily look at all of these different cooking boards. Now, when you are first and foremost going to sell a product, you should always research who your competitors are going to be. You should understand from a granular level what you can expect to be getting out of this category. So if we want to just go to the cutting boards category, we'll come here for best sellers in cutting boards, and we can start to see who is selling the best, what they are selling price-wise. So let's say we wanted to compete in a little bit more of a niche way, and we wanted to compete solely against glass cutting boards. So what we would do is we would look through here, understand where the first one for glass is. So it looks like this one. We have a tempered glass one who is number 45 in the category. So let's click on that one. And a little interesting thing you can do is if you have helium-10, you can go here and you can click X-ray. And this is going to give us some understanding of the actual product, what the sales velocity is, how much they are actually making off of the product. So as you can see here, in the last 30 days, they have sold a cumulative 1,800 units across all of their different variations. So you can see they have a couple different variations here. So all of these variations have sold roughly 1,800, 1,900 units. Now, when going into a category, you have to understand that you are not going to immediately take over from somebody else's sales velocity. They have more ranking, they have a higher BSR, they have more ratings overall. There is a lot of different factors at play here. However, you can roughly estimate that you may be able to take, let's say, 5%. If you are looking at taking 1 to 5% of the actual marketplace here, you can understand and start to have an idea of how many units you're going to need. So let's say you want to take over 5% of the actual market share. So if we take that 1,800 units per month, we multiply that by 5%, we would need roughly 90 units per month. So take that times 90. Oops, wrong way there. You would take that 1,800, so that 90 times 3. There we go, 270. So you would take that 270 and you would understand that that's roughly how much you're going to need to get started. You're going to assume you're going to be selling about 3 units a day, right? So that is, 1 unit a day for the next, 90 days overall. So essentially that's where you're going to want to say, okay, I want to take 5% of this particular ASIN's market share. I'm going to launch a similar product. I have some good ideas for it that I can take, a certain percentage in the next 90 days. From that aspect as well, you have to understand that you are still going to have marketing dollars. You're still going to have to inventory forecast. And after your first month, that is the point in which you will understand and start to be able to utilize this demand forecast. So once you have 30 days worth of data, you have 270 units. Let's say you way under predicted and you've taken 20% market share. Okay, now we're going to have to, get 4 times as much inventory as we really thought we would need, which is one of the things that this tool will help you understand and do, is just demand forecast for that possibility. Amazon's tool is based on algorithms that understand the idea of growth potential on all of the products, so you can have a relatively easy idea of what you're going to be doing. So it only takes about 30 days from new seller to having demand forecasting if the product has enough sales velocity. Now, the one thing to note is that not every single product is going to have this kind of demand forecast. If we go all the way to the very back here, we can see there are zeros here, so we don't have enough data to provide a forecast for the actual unit demand of this. So this really just comes down to, does your product have enough sales velocity? If you are not having enough sales velocity, then this is not going to be helpful to you, as you're not going to be able to properly predict. Now, that also comes into play if your product is not selling currently or you are having sales issues. You can generally assume that you're going to run into excess and overstock inventory, in which case you should start looking at the idea of changing your actual sales plan rather than looking at your demand forecasting. So the longer this time frame of total days of supply keeps going up, the longer you can assume that Amazon is not going to be pushing the product in any way, shape, or form. So this is a very rough and easy way of understanding the actual demand forecast of your product. Again, recommendation on my end is always going to be 60 to 90 days worth of inventory at any given time. You always have to take into account your manufacture time, your shipping time. If you're going to be getting it done in China, it's going to typically take about 2 weeks to a month, depending on what your product is for the manufacturer. It's going to take another 2 to 3 weeks for it to get here from boat. So you're always going to be looking at having all of your shipments put together, all of your demand forecasting about 2 months in advance from when you're actually going to have that product sent over to FBA and be available to the end consumer. So take that into account when you're doing 60, 90 days worth of inventory. You can also start utilizing new tools like AWD. Send in 6 months worth of inventory to AWD and then constantly replenish FBA from that inventory. Makes it very, very simple to never run out of stock, which, as we all know, is the number one sin on Amazon. So hopefully this helped you understand demand forecasting a little bit better. Happy to do even more in depth in the future, and looking forward to more sales.